True vengeance is rarely a cinematic spectacle. It doesn't involve poisoned chalices, elaborate traps, or screaming matches in the pouring rain. No, the most devastating form of retribution is subtle. It is a slow, psychological drip of poisoned honey, administered with a warm smile and steady eye contact. It is a game of attrition, played out over years of polite dinner parties and forced social gatherings. I know this because I am currently executing a lifelong campaign of psychological warfare against a woman who made a single, unforgivable mistake. She insulted my wife, and she thought she could get away with it under the guise of friendship. The architect of this entire ordeal was a woman named Phaedra. Phaedra was one of those people who treated her own life like a prestigious magazine editorial, demanding that everyone around her serve as unpaid background extras. 2 years ago, she married a wealthy, aggressively bland man named Bryce. Naturally, a single evening of celebration would not suffice. Phaedra orchestrated a grueling 3-day marathon of matrimonial exhaustion, featuring multiple venues, overlapping schedules, and 4 entirely distinct dress codes. It was less a wedding and more a hostage situation with a floral budget. Day 1 commenced with a welcome dinner scheduled for 9 o'clock on a Thursday evening. Odelia, my fiercely loyal and endlessly patient wife, insisted we attend to show our support. We arrived at a dimly lit, overpriced fusion restaurant downtown, already drained from a full day at the office. We navigated 3 hours of forced mingling, shouting over abrasive bass lines and pretending to enjoy thimble-sized appetizers. As midnight approached, Phaedra cornered us near the coat check. She announced, with the manic energy of someone running on pure adrenaline and champagne, that the entire party was relocating to a subterranean nightclub. We politely declined. It was a weeknight, we had demanding jobs, and the mere thought of vibrating floors made my jaw clench. We offered our congratulations and escaped into the crisp night air. The penalty for our early departure was delivered the very next morning at her mandatory recovery brunch. Phaedra sat at the head of a long, sun-drenched table, nursing a mimosa. The moment we sat down, she projected her voice so the entire patio could hear. She recounted the legendary events of the nightclub, lamenting our absence with theatrical pity. She then leaned in, her eyes gleaming with manufactured innocence, and noted that even the elderly relatives and the ring-bearer managed to stay out until 2 in the morning. The implication hung heavily over the untouched croissants. We were boring, inadequate friends. I felt a surge of heat in my chest, but Odelia gently squeezed my knee under the table. I swallowed the sharp retort burning on my tongue and offered a tight, polite smile. That afternoon involved 2 separate ceremonies, one cultural, one secular, requiring a rapid costume change in the cramped bathroom of a boutique hotel. By the time Sunday morning arrived, bringing with it the final, inescapable farewell brunch, Odelia and I were running on fumes. We were entirely depleted of social energy, yet we rose early. We squeezed ourselves into our 4th coordinated outfit of the weekend. Odelia stood in front of the steamy bathroom mirror for over an hour, meticulously applying her makeup, curling her hair, and ensuring her pastel linen dress was perfectly pressed. She looked beautiful. She looked like she had tried, which, in Phaedra's orbit, was the only currency that mattered. We arrived at the country club patio, the glare of the mid-morning sun reflecting harshly off the crystal glassware. Phaedra was holding court near the mimosa fountain. Odelia approached, extending a warm smile and a final congratulatory hug. Phaedra stepped back, her gaze raking slowly over Odelia from the top of her carefully styled hair down to her polished sandals. A small, pitying smirk tugged at the corner of Phaedra's glossy lips. "Oh, hi, babe," Phaedra purred, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She tilted her head, letting the silence stretch just long enough to be uncomfortable. "Wow. You look comfy." The word hit like a physical blow. It was a masterclass in passive-aggressive cruelty. Comfy. It wasn't an observation, it was an indictment. It was Phaedra's way of declaring that Odelia hadn't tried hard enough, that her effort was invisible, that she was fundamentally underdressed and unimpressive. I watched the light drain out of Odelia's eyes. The hour in front of the mirror, the agonizing over the dress code, the sheer exhaustion we had endured to support this woman, all of it dismissed with a single venomous adjective. Odelia forced a laugh, brushing it off, but her shoulders slumped. In the car ride home, Odelia stared out the window, quietly defending the indefensible. She reasoned that Phaedra was simply overwhelmed, that bridezilla syndrome was a real psychological phenomenon, that the stress of the weekend had temporarily stolen her friend's filter. I nodded, letting her find comfort in those excuses. But internally, a cold, unyielding resolve settled over me. Phaedra wasn't stressed. Phaedra was an elitist bully who used her wedding as a weapon to assert dominance. And right then, gripping the steering wheel, I made a silent vow. I would not cause a scene. I would not demand an apology. Instead, I would become the architect of Phaedra's slow, agonizing, psychological unraveling. The first strike occurred 6 months later at a casual backyard barbecue hosted by a mutual acquaintance. The weather was oppressively humid, the kind of heat that made clothes cling aggressively to the skin. Phaedra arrived wearing an oversized, aggressively branded athletic set and oversized sunglasses, clearly aiming for an effortlessly wealthy aesthetic. She had, however, spent an obvious amount of time applying a full face of heavy matte makeup, completely incongruous with the athletic wear. I waited until she was holding a paper plate of potato salad, completely unguarded. I strolled up, smiling warmly. "Phaedra, it is so good to see you," I said, keeping my voice utterly sincere. I looked her up and down, letting my eyes linger just a fraction of a second too long on her heavily contoured cheekbones. "I just have to say, I absolutely love how you just don't care about vanity anymore. Just throwing on whatever, going with that entirely natural look. It's inspiring. Who cares what people think, right?" She froze, a dollop of potato salad slid off her plate and landed in the grass. Her eyes darted beneath the dark lenses of her sunglasses. She was wearing 2 layers of foundation and a set of magnetic eyelashes, yet I had just congratulated her on giving up and looking completely raw. She opened her mouth, closed it, and managed a strained, "Thanks." I patted her shoulder and walked away, feeling a profound sense of inner peace. A year later, the campaign escalated. It was a formal holiday dinner party. Odelia and I arrived precisely at 7, bringing a carefully selected vintage wine. By 8:15, the host was pacing the kitchen, the roast was drying out, and the atmosphere was growing tense. Finally, at 8:30, the front door swung open. Phaedra and Bryce breezed in, unapologetic, bringing a rush of cold winter air and a flurry of loud, meaningless excuses about traffic. Phaedra was draped in faux fur, laughing loudly as if her tardiness was a charming quirk rather than a blatant disrespect of everyone's time. We finally sat down to eat. Bryce was regaling the table with a tedious story about his golf handicap. I caught Phaedra's eye across the flickering candlelight of the centerpiece. I raised my wine glass in a mock salute. "You know, Phaedra," I began, my tone laced with genuine awe. "I really wish I could have your attitude, just arriving whenever the mood strikes, strolling in on your own schedule. It must be so freeing to live like that. I'm cursed with this need to always show up on time and respect schedules. I just admire your utter lack of concern for all that." Bryce chuckled, entirely oblivious to the subtext, and slapped the table. "That's my girl. Runs on Phaedra time." But Phaedra didn't laugh. I watched the gears grind behind her eyes. She was a woman who prided herself on being hyper-organized, the ultimate social director. Being called out for chronic, selfish lateness, packaged neatly as a compliment about her free spirit, was unbearable to her. A muscle in her jaw fluttered. She spent the rest of the meal chewing her roast beef with the aggressive intensity of a woodchipper. But the crowning achievement, the masterpiece of my ongoing vendetta, happened just a few months ago. It was a wine-tasting trip for Odelia's birthday. We were gathered in a rustic, oak-paneled tasting room overlooking a sprawling vineyard. Phaedra, unable to handle an event where she wasn't the center of attention, arrived in an outfit that defied logic. She wore a skin-tight silk slip dress, precarious stiletto heels that kept sinking into the gravel, and a massive, dramatic sun hat that kept knocking over wine glasses. She looked utterly ridiculous, shivering in the drafty cellar, desperately trying to project an image of effortless European glamour. She hobbled over to our barrel table, rubbing her bare arms, her face pinched tight with the effort of standing upright. I smiled, letting the warmth of the expensive Pinot Noir fill my chest. I looked directly into her eyes, channeling the exact tone, the exact pitch, and the exact pitying smirk she had used on my wife 3 years prior. "Phaedra," I said softly, letting the silence stretch just a beat too long. "Wow, you look super comfy." The reaction was immediate and beautiful. Her posture stiffened. She looked down at her silk dress, then at her tortuous heels, then back at me. She knew deep down in her meticulously curated soul, she knew exactly what I was doing. She was freezing, her feet were bleeding, and she looked ridiculous, and I had just validated all her insecurities by calling her comfy. But she couldn't say a word. To accuse me of malice would mean acknowledging her own cruelty to Odelia. She was trapped in the prison of her own passive aggression. She offered a tight, terrifying grimace and practically limped away toward the restroom. Odelia still believes Phaedra just has an eccentric personality. She remains the kind, forgiving soul she has always been, oblivious to the invisible war being waged in her honor. But I know the truth. I see the hesitation in Phaedra's eyes whenever we meet. I see her second-guessing her outfits, overanalyzing her greetings, desperately trying to decode my smiling face. I have successfully infiltrated her psyche. And the best part, I have an endless supply of polite, destructive observations waiting in the wings. I will continue to admire her bravery, her unique priorities, and her comfy aesthetic at every holiday, every birthday, and every anniversary. I will play this game until she finally breaks and vanishes from our lives entirely, or until one of us is lowered into the earth. Sometimes, standing up for the people you love doesn't mean shouting from the rooftops or demanding justice. Sometimes it means playing the long game. It means protecting your partner's peace by quietly dismantling the ego of anyone who dares to diminish them. Words are weapons, and when wielded with enough patience and a polite smile, they can break through the thickest armor. If you've ever had to deal with a toxic friend, a narcissistic relative, or a bully hiding behind a smile, remember that you don't always have to fight fire with fire. Sometimes, ice is far more effective. If you enjoyed this story of slow burn retribution, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and tell me in the comments down below. How would you have handled a friend like Phaedra? Stay sharp, protect your peace, and I'll see you in the next one.